And we'll go to the next one in the program. We have Chris Vogliano from Massey University in New Zealand, but he's also affiliated with Biodiversity International. And he's presenting, can biodiverse food systems reverse the rise of chronic diseases while providing climate change resilience in the small island developing states?
Can you guys hear me? Excellent. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a project I'm working on with a few partners listed here about how biodiverse food systems may help reverse the rising tide of malnutrition and provide a sense of climate resiliency in Pacific small island developing states. My name is Chris Vogliano. I am a PhD candidate at Massey University. I'm also affiliated as a research fellow with Biodiversity International. You're welcome to tweet at me. If you want to, we can continue the conversation afterwards. I'd love to hear from you or even collaborate. And I also want to thank the partners for this research, Massey University, Biodiversity International, and FAO. But before I begin about kind of what we've done, I'm curious, how many of you have been to the Pacific Island countries? Raise your hand. Okay. Maybe like 6? Excellent. I honestly, before starting this research, was not familiar with Pacific Island countries very much at all, but they're broken up by 3 ethno-geographic locations. We have Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia. Each island consists of vastly different genetic and biological diversity, and they're vastly rich in both of those. Some of them are atolls that rise maybe just a few meters off the sea, and some of them have snow-capped mountains, so they are very, very diverse. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, being so isolated in the middle of the Pacific Island, or in the middle of the Pacific Oceans, there are some serious challenges that Pacific Island countries are facing. One, climate change. Rising sea levels, increased intensity of storms are immediate threats for Pacific Island countries. Also, diet-related NCDs are on the rise, and malnutrition in general. In fact, 9 of the 10 most obese countries in the world are located in the Pacific. And lastly, biodiversity loss. Due to deforestation, mining, land use change from tourism, there are a variety of reasons this is happening, but it is having devastating impacts on indigenous food systems in the Pacific. So this project is located in the Solomon Islands. It is a chain of 900 islands, over 900 islands, that are home to 650,000 indigenous peoples. This population speaks over 75 distinct languages, which blew my mind when I heard about that. It's really incredible, the cultural diversity that exists in these islands. 80% of the population lives in rural areas, only 20% lives in the urban capital. And it is known as a center of biological diversity. So we conducted one pilot study at the end of last year, and we're going to be conducting 2 more village studies in about 1 month. So the results I'm going to be sharing today are from the first pilot study, but in a few months we'll have a lot more data. So this is the methodology that we are using. We're using a mixed method approach to really examine the past, the present, and the future projections and challenges of the food systems in the Solomon Islands. The participatory focus groups are broken up into women, men, and youth to get unique perspectives. And in addition to that, we will be doing anthropometric measurements on a sampling of households throughout the villages, including body fat percentage, lean muscle mass, waist circumference, etc. We'll also be doing repeat 24-hour multiple pass recalls, and this methodology has been adapted to include species-specific information, as well as the variety of information, and as well as where they sourced each ingredient from, so we get more rich data. And we will also be including, and we have included, a food and nutrition questionnaire that assesses knowledge, attitudes, and practices from anything from nutrition, education, all the way to food waste. So really, we're trying to assess what are the issues in the food systems here, and how can we future-proof these food systems? It's worth noting that when I started my literature review, there was literally next to nothing in the Solomon Islands, so the literature is very sparse. So this is why we're starting from from the baseline here. We're trying to just really assess the situation. As you can imagine, we have a lot of data, so I'm just going to go through a few highlights here. But in the participatory focus group discussions, we found a wide variety of rich information, including that there were over 253 varieties of foods available for consumption within this community. Obviously, not all of these are utilized, but the fact that they exist shows the vast diversity of foods available. We also found that knowledge transmission is rapidly on the decline. The adults are not transferring the cultural rich information to the youth because the youth, they think that the youth does not want to learn. But when we discussed this with the youth was actually quite interested, so there's a very big gap there. And as we talked about, the shift away from traditional foods to ultra-processed foods is causing a rise in malnutrition. And lastly, the productivity of the land is declining, and this is really a challenge given the fact that the population is expected to double by 2050. We extracted this timeline from the focus group discussions, and I won't spend too much time on this because I only have 10 minutes, but notably, the arrival of the Seventh-day Adventists and those that subscribe to this religion, it really inhibits the amount of seafood that they can consume due to religious beliefs. Also, World War II, the Japanese American soldiers were fighting over top of the Solomon Islands, unfortunately, but with them they also brought a wide variety of ultra-processed foods. And the same goes with the logging in the 1990s. From our quantitative nutrition survey, we found that over 60% of the women surveyed were overweight or obese with an average body fat percentage of 31.1%. And food insecurity was very high during the lean season between April and June. And lastly, when asked about food preservation techniques, very few were actually leveraged, with the exception of one food, the nolly nut. And I would love to talk more about that too if anybody's interested. It's a really neat agroforestry product. So here are the results from the nutrition, or the multiple pass 24-hour recall. And as you can see, there are many micronutrients, minerals, and the macronutrient protein that is inadequate in their intake. And I did want to throw in a little plug for this white paper here from Biodiversity International, but it's called Mainstreaming Agrobiodiversity in Sustainable Food Systems. And they really promote the idea that agrobiodiversity can help improve productivity, nutrient density, adaptability, and climate resiliency of agricultural food production systems. And I want to give you two examples of foods that we discovered during our research that really reflect this. One is the Fei'e banana. This is the golden child of the Pacific. It is incredibly nutrient rich. In fact, it contains 100 times the beta carotene of a typical Cavendish banana. But unfortunately, this is falling to the forest floor and not actually being utilized very much, even though those we talked to really did enjoy eating this food. So this is a really, if we sustainably intensified this and promoted it, this could be a food-based intervention to combating vitamin A deficiency. Another food is bele, or slippery cabbage. I personally don't like that name. It sounds disgusting, but it is actually really delicious food. And it's such a rich source of micronutrients, including carotenoids, zinc, calcium, and protein. And this food actually is very well utilized within the communities and across the Pacific. It's actually noted as one of the most nutrient-dense foods in the Pacific Island countries. And if for some reason this were to slip out of the food consumption patterns, there would be a rise in malnutrition solely from this food. And this is a traditional dish that's consumed called Massey Massey, and it uses that slippery cabbage almost as like a lasagna with nolly nuts in between. They're very proud of this food, and it's also very nutrient-rich. We don't have time to go into all the foods available there, but the point is, here's some leafy green vegetables, a full side of them, and another one, and the list goes on with so many varieties of foods. But the issue is that these foods have not been properly analyzed for nutrient composition, meaning that we don't know what nutrients many of these foods contain. And that's a problem if we're trying to use food-based interventions to solve malnutrition. So how do we reverse the rise of malnutrition in the Pacific Island countries? Well, one, as you can imagine, utilizing neglected and underutilized species, sustainably intensifying these species and integrating them into agricultural production. Two, through our focus group discussions, we learned that school-age children receive next to no nutrition education, let alone any education on traditional knowledge and culture. So there's a huge opportunity to infuse this information into schools. As mentioned, the agricultural productivity is on the decline, and a sub-target of SDG number 2 is doubling agricultural productivity by 2030. This is a huge opportunity, and we could even use neglected and underutilized species such as legumes as nitrogen fixers, or even just introducing the concept of nutrient recycling through composting. It would dramatically help improve their crop yields. Food preservation as well during the lean seasons or during cyclones or large weather events. It's really important to have a backup food supply rather than relying on imported food such as white rice and noodles. And lastly, policies, always a good answer, right? Food fortification is being talked about currently in the Pacific. Some islands have fortified flour, the Solomons have not yet. Sugar-sweetened beverage tax has not occurred in the Solomons yet, but there are actually many Pacific Island countries that have already utilized this tax, and they're seeing some benefit there. And lastly, as a dietitian, a trans fat ban, honestly, it breaks my heart to see how many foods contain partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. We know the science is very, very clear on this, that trans fat, even in small amounts, is extremely detrimental to cardiovascular disease risk. So a trans fat ban would be an easy win for the population. So in short, Pacific Island countries' health and nutrition and their biodiversity is being threatened by natural and anthropogenic factors. But promoting agrobiodiversity is essential for food and nutrition security and offers key options for sustainable livelihoods. I want to acknowledge my supervisors, Biodiversity International, and the Solomon Islanders for really providing the expertise through their nutritionists and their scientists that we work with to identify the species. And I want to thank you guys all for listening. Thank you.